Welcome to the Office of Diversity and Inclusion's inaugural Inclusive Excellence Scholar Residency. The Inclusive Excellence Scholar Residency brings to our campus nationally recognized scholars for the purpose of fostering critical thinking, reflection, dialogue, and strategic innovation among the members of the campus and the broader community on issues related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. In doing this, the residency functions to advance the University of Dayton's Catholic and Marianist mission and commitment to being a university for the common good. An undertaking of this magnitude cannot be accomplished without the help of a lot of partners. And I won't list them all, but I do want to draw your attention to the list of co-sponsors on the program. And to each of you, I say thank you. I also say thank you to our president, Dr. Eric Spina, to our provost, Dr. Paul Benson, and to all of our colleagues and partners who are engaged in this extraordinary and exciting mission at the University of Dayton. But I want to give a really, really special shout out to the staff of the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. Tiffany Taylor-Smith, our new executive director for Inclusive Excellence, and Chandra Hightower, who's always behind the scenes, and she's behind the door, who is our coordinator for extraordinary commitment and work in pulling this together. This year, our inaugural scholar is a friend and a colleague. Dr. Damon A. Williams, a native of Dayton, Ohio. And given that, I want to give special honor and acknowledgement and recognition of his family, his grandmother. I honor you and I thank you, his mother, brother, and niece, and other family members who are coming. Thank you. God has used you to bring into the world an instrument that is impacting the globe. Thank you so much. So I'm not going to steal Kathleen Henderson's thunder in terms of the introduction, but I just want to express publicly an expression of gratitude to Damon himself. Damon, you have been a friend and a colleague. You're younger than me in age, but I consider you in many ways a mentor. Thank you for your commitment. Thank you for grinding on behalf of diversity, excellence, and inclusion, brother. And thank you for being here at Dayton. So this evening, we will have a prayer offered by Father Joseph Kozar, followed by an introduction from Kathleen Henderson, a legend in her own right at the University of Dayton. And then following that, we will hear from our guest scholar, our inaugural scholar, Dr. Williams. We will have a period of question and answer with our guest scholar. But following that, and what's not listed here is or will be a special presentation. So if you could hang in there until that presentation is made, we would appreciate it. And then following that, there will be a book signing out here in the lobby. Thank you so much for being here. Put on your seatbelts, because we're about to go for a ride. God bless you and thank you.
Let us pray. O God, you created all people in your image and likeness. We thank you for the astounding variety of races and cultures in this world. Enrich our lives by ever-widening circles of community on our campus and in our outreach to the greater Dayton area. Show us your presence in those who differ from us until our knowledge of your love is made perfect. You have made all of us alike in a common humanity, and yet we are different in many ways. Our background, cultures, customs, religious beliefs, and languages open up and situate the world differently. May we embrace, understand, and cultivate the differences among us as a source of grace and insight into your creative power. Behind difference, may we see each other as we really all are, all children of God. May we transform our institutional culture by developing a strategic vision that will guide our efforts to commit to diversity, inclusion, and equity. May the God who created a world of diversity and vibrancy go with us as we dialogue together. May the God who teaches us to care for those near to us go with us in our outreach to our neighbors in the Dayton area. May the God who breaks down our barriers and celebrates community go with us as we find the courage to make our campus a place of welcome for all. We ask this in your name. Amen.
Good evening. Find something you are passionate about and go deep into that thing. Make that thing a thing that ultimately becomes your job, your vocation, and your calling, your burning obsession, and you'll never work a day in your life. Those are the words of our speaker this evening, Dr. Damon Williams. The good piece about this is it's something that I know intimately is who our speaker is. Never work a day in your life finding that calling, that vocation, that's something that you're passionate about, and I'd add in it and share it. Earlier today, I kept thinking, how am I going to introduce Damon? And the words of a Patti LaBelle song kept floating through my head. When you've been blessed, it feels like heaven. Pass it on. When you've been blessed, pass it on. And the words of the Marianist founders, when you've been educated, pass it on. When you've learned, pass it on. When you serve, you pass it on. Damon Williams is that legendary, as he said, I'm legendary. Damon is that legendary young man who comes with such a power and such a passion that you can't help but get caught up in his whirlwind. You can't help but get caught up in all of who he is and what he brings because he's so passionate about it that he wants you two to feel the energy that he brings. I was blessed to have been in a position some years ago when Damon was just a graduate student at Miami University looking for a place to share his talents, and he found the Office of Multicultural Affairs at the University of Dayton. When he offered this tremendous talent and passion, he offered it to us for free. As a friend would say, I might have been born at night, but it wasn't last night, so of course, I took it. The only caution that I had to give Damon, because Mama, Grandma, I know you all have dealt with this, Damon was single, good-looking young man, and I'd started noticing the young women were making more frequent visits to the office. I took Damon aside and said, Damon, you need to watch it. Oh, yeah, I got it. said, okay. I never worried about him because, again, what he would do is take that energy that came in looking for one thing and help swirl them in his passion and help them become educated and know more about who they were and how they could have an impact in this world. So again, as I think about this introduction, I thought, and I share a little bit of Damon from back in the day, a little bit from his speech to the University of Michigan, that opening quote, and then let's be who we are today with social media and take the Facebook intro. Damon A. Williams just completed his term as Senior Vice President and Chief Education and Youth Development Officer at Boys and Girls Clubs of America. He is a former Vice Provost, Associate Vice Chancellor, Chief Diversity Officer at University of Wisconsin-Madison. Damon studied at the University of Michigan and also at Miami University. He attended Western Reserve Academy and currently lives in Atlanta, Georgia. I love that Damon never fails to let people know he's from Dayton, Ohio. Yes, very good. Damon shared in a speech that if you move the needle on your passions, on your goals, yourself and your loved ones, constantly they too will grow. He reminded those graduates in Michigan to only bring individuals into your universe who bring light into your life. Something tells me that that's probably something he learned from his grandma. Only bring in those who bring light. Always remember that it's not about you. Such a powerful, simple statement. It's not about you, and that the riches come to those who live a life of service and to those who live a life of giving. Damon shares that this keynote session will be a part of the National Inclusive Excellence Campaign that focuses on empowering new generation of leaders to innovate around issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Some of the topics that he has covered would include why is diversity so important in the new economy and how do we work together to make its promise a reality? Why is there so much talk of diversity, theme change, and yet so little results? He writes, who are centennials and how do we meet the imperatives of this mobile-first, digitally engaged, hip-hop generation of youth that are trailing behind the millennials and are both open and fearful for their future? And finally, why is there so much talk of change and so little results? Leveraging national data, introspective stories, promising best practices, and the pragmatic voice that can only come from someone having led on diversity, equity, and inclusion at all levels of leadership. His lecture promises to entertain, empower, celebrate, and inspire hope in all in attendance. Ladies and gentlemen, you can read the back of the program for more about him, but what I'd like to say is, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to bring to the stage Dr. Damon A. Williams.
I tell you what, she was going for some tears back there, but I held out. I held out. Thank you so much for that auspicious introduction, and thank each and every one of you for the gift of your time today. Mr. President, Mr. Provost, members of the faculty, Chief Diversity Officer Burnley, community members and students, it is amazing to be with you today, and it is amazing to be home. It is amazing to be here. I grew up just a short drive away in West Dayton, but I tell you, it was a long journey to get here today. Much longer than that drive from West Dayton. And as was noted in my introduction, there are members of my family and my friends who are here. I want to acknowledge my beautiful grandmother, my mother, my brother, my niece, my sister, my nephew, my brother-in-law, my fraternity brothers, individuals who came and made the trip. Thank you so much for being here. It is hallowed time for us to be in community, and I am so grateful to be with you right now. Now, about the business. For those of you who are activating in social media, I am at DAWPhD, and we are hashtagging strategic diversity leadership, and we are hashtagging inclusive excellence. So if you're going to get after it in social media, please take note of those hashtags, and let's do this. as was noted in my introduction, I believe that some individuals understand what they do. Some understand how they go about doing it. But true leadership, true greatness in our organizations is understanding why we do what we do. Not what, not simply how, but why do we do what we do. You had a chance in the introduction to understand a bit about my why, my purpose, my reason for being, my mission, my manifesto as a leader. And my why is powered by burning questions, and I want to share them, and you heard a preview of them. Number one, what is diversity in this moment that we find ourselves? As we talk about race, ethnicity, sexuality, disability, background, diversity of perspective, geographic diversity, economic diversity, international diversity, diversity of people with red hair and green hair and blue hair and all types of piercings and everything in between. Diversity, broadly defined. So what is that diversity? Number two, how do we engage in this broad and inclusive conversation of diversity, and at the same time not lose sight of work that still remains incomplete and undone for African Americans, for Latinos, for women? How do we have that broad, big tent of diversity, but yet not lose sight of specific group needs? A third question, what does it mean not just to do stuff, but what does it mean to lead strategically? With the same amount of rigor and focus that we would with any other challenge and task that we're trying to advance from point A to point B to point C. How do you move strategically forward? How do we embrace the realities of what I refer to as the centennial generation? The students who are coming to our campus born after 1997, and my centennial nephew Imani is in the house today. Give some love for Imani. Perhaps a future flyer. That's right, we're putting the pressure on him. Perhaps a future flyer. How do we engage in this moment about the centennial generation born after 1997, trailing the millennials who are yet similar to millennials but very different? How do we engage them? How do we embrace who they are and the imperatives that they bring to our educational environment? And then last, and definitely not least, the question that has powered my work since the time I was a student leader, the question that has empowered my work where I was Senior Vice President and Chief Education Officer for Boys and Girls Clubs of America, leading a $250 million portfolio, the same work and the same question that powers my work here today. Why is there so much talk of change and so little results? So much talk of change, but so little results. These are the questions that have powered my work. These are the questions that power my life. I have had the opportunity to work with thousands of organizations, to visit institutions all across the U.S. and indeed in 5 countries around the world. And wherever I go, I am oftentimes confronted with the following. Our institution is struggling with respect to campus diversity and needs to find a way to turn the corner. How can we do it? Where do we start? How can we truly make a difference? We have a diversity plan, but is it enough? Can you tell us what to do? Can you help? We need the force. Save me, Obi-Wan Williams. You're our only hope. Now, I oftentimes get this when I go to different places. And I get this because institutions and leaders are oftentimes looking for magic diversity bullets. What is the silver solution thing that's going to allow us to diversify our faculty? What is the single solution thing that's going to allow for individuals who are otherly able to be engaged fully on our campus? What is the single solution thing that's going to allow us to disrupt inequity in educational outcomes? But what we know is that there is no silver bullet. There is no magic solution. And I, like so many others, don't have that, and I don't bring that with me. If someone in the room knows, please let me know. I want to get your name and I want to interview you, but I don't have that. What we do know is that diversity and change takes time, and it takes commitment. And while what we may love to see is that blue and red curve where it's a very steep success curve, the reality is it's about being in the trenches. It's about each and every one of us every day giving up a little bit of our privilege for someone who is vulnerable. It's about each and every one of us finding opportunities to be courageous in our day-to-day activities. It's about those of us who are leaders leading and not being asked to lead. It's about each and every one of us having a courage and a conviction to do more than what got you here, because that is the world demands. And that is hard, that is difficult, that is trenched, and that is never easy. I believe the work of moving our institutions and this idea of inclusive excellence is about this work of culture change. Culture change. What you see behind me is the legendary model created by Edgar Schein, the MIT organizational learning professor. And at the outermost ring of culture, he talks about this idea of the geospatial dimensions of culture. That's the environment. It's the pictures we put up on the wall. By show of hands, how many of you have seen the movie Do the Right Thing, created by Spike Lee nearly 20 plus years ago now? Some of you, a number of you. There's a classic scene in the movie where young Spike Lee is a pizza delivery boy, and he's in this Italian-American pizzeria. And in this Italian-American pizzeria, there's a question that he asks when he looks up on the wall. He said, "Yo, Sal, why there ain't no pictures of no brothers on the wall?" He was asking why there were no depictions of African Americans on the wall, but all the customers in the restaurant were African American. He was commenting to the geospatial dimension of culture. He was commenting to that part of our institutional environments that is defined by the pictures we put up, the symbols we put up, the things that we put in that tapestry. And candidly, that's a fairly easy dimension of culture to manipulate and move. But if we think about culture like a piece of fruit, and on the outermost rim of, let's say, a plum, it's fleshy and it's soft, and it's easy to cut and easy to slice and easy to bite into, just like that geospatial dimension is. When we move from the outermost rim of that culture fruit to the innermost rim, we get to something that is much more deep. It's much more hard. It's more calcitrant. It's more difficult to change. And so when we talk about changing and shifting and evolving our organizational, our institutional cultures, we're talking about the difficult work of how we evolve our mindsets, our mental models, the way we look at the world, the way we frame reality. University of Dayton is celebrating the fact that the most diverse cohort of students in the history of the university is now here and on campus. Is the mental model and the frame that you have that is part and parcel to your excellence equation? Or is the mental model that you have that there is something deficit about that? As we think about and open up the conversation of inclusion and excellence, do we see inclusion as deficit, or do we see inclusion as value added? The mental models we have, the assumptions we have, and how do we change that at the innermost realm of culture? Now, I do believe that I am a Jedi, wise and strong in the power of the Force. Don't get it twisted. And so in coming here today, I consulted the wisdom of Master Yoda, and this is what he said. Strongest is the culture with this one. Colleges and universities are most resistant to change. Nebulous and multiple goals they have. Decentralized environments are prevalent. Shared governance confounds the greatest of leaders. Faculty and staff live long in the life of the campus. Conflicting ideas exist regarding diversity and excellence. Loosely coupled systems make the future difficult to see. Ritualistic and symbolic are their planning efforts, not focused on real change and deep transformation. Difficult will be the process of transforming culture. Difficult will be the process of implementing campus-wide diversity plans. Difficult will be the process of achieving inclusive excellence. Strong you must be in your resolve. Proceed forward with caution. So, I do consult the wisdom of Master Yoda often. And in my consultation with Master Yoda, I was channeling his voice. But those of you who are organizationists, those of you who have spent a day in the life of a university, you understand the difficult and the challenge that comes with trying to move culture. You understand that the very way and the DNA of who we are as a type of organization make it so difficult to move it and nearly impervious to move it quickly. I make those points to crystallize the challenge and the reality of what it takes to move it. Because in so many instances, our cultures are powerful in their resistance of the change effort. And it takes the collective effort and the energy of so many to move that agenda. Not simply a committed president or provost or chief diversity officer, not simply the committed and challenging voice of students, but each and every one of us engaged in a perfect project, in a perfect conversation, not fearful of being involved and engaged, but deeply leaning in and being a part of something magical, because indeed the world we live in today necessitates it. Now, a part of the title of my lecture was around this notion of innovating. One of my favorite authors are Hayden and Christensen at the Harvard University Business School, who talk about this idea of innovation. How do we innovate in the corporate sector? How do we innovate in the not-for-profit sector? How do we innovate in the higher education sector? And they ask some very simple research questions. Those very simple research questions were very simply, what are the key characteristics of innovators? What makes an innovator an innovator? What are those key characteristics? What are their DNA? And so in asking that question, they framed out a model that I wanted to share with you today. One, innovators are always questioning their world. If you are not questioning your reality, if you're not questioning the present state, you're not an innovator. Two, innovators are always looking to search and reapply what they know works somewhere else. If it works at Sinclair, could it work at the University of Dayton, even though their DNA looked different? If it works at GE Capital, could it work at the University of Dayton, even though their DNA looked different? If it worked at Xavier University or Holy Cross University or Loyola University or any other institution, could it work here even though their DNA looked different? Because innovators are always begging the question, how do we search out the solutions that work and reapply them where we are today? The third thing that innovators do, innovators understand that you have to find yourself and put yourself in the company of other innovators. Innovation is difficult. Cutting against the grain is difficult. Doing the uncommon is difficult. And so you have to find spaces where you can be around other innovators to drive your innovation engine. It's the reason Silicon Valley exists, because that's the hotspot of innovation. It's the reason new Silicon Valleys are emerging in LA and new Silicon Valleys are emerging in Vegas, because what they know at the hotbed, at the cutting edge, at the bleeding edge of what's next is they gotta be around others who believe what they believe, who buy into what they buy into. People don't buy what you do, people buy why you do it. Let me say that again. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. 2 weeks ago, I made the decision that I wanted to disrupt the diversity, equity, and inclusion agenda in this nation. And I sent an email around the country. And within 1 week, I had over 1,000 leaders who signed up to be a part of my webinar on Wednesday. We will have over 2,000 leaders on that webinar, not because of me, but because what I offered in the world, people wanted to be a part of that. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And in understanding that, it's important to be around other innovators. Innovators don't simply talk about it. In the world, there are so many people that talk a good game. Students, young people in the room. Innovators, they about that life. They about that life of innovation. They get after it. They do things. They try. They have a bias towards action. But they don't just have a bias towards action. Once they figure out what works, innovators, they want to level up. They want to scale up. They want to go broad. So you figure out what works, you prove the concept, and then you go broad. But the thing that I found about issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which make this model fall short, is irrespective of whether you are a student engaged in the Black Lives Matter movement, you are a student engaged in the women's movement, you are a student engaged in the LGBTQ movement, you are Martin Luther King, you are Ida B. Wells, you are any individual who chose to disrupt. Innovators, hear me now, have this last characteristic. Innovators always have courage. They lead with courage. Are you with me? Are you with me? Can we say innovators lead with courage? Innovators lead with courage. At the end of the day, if we don't have courage to step up and step out, to disrupt the status quo, nothing ever changes. And sometimes that means you have to innovate, not in the context of what you know works. Sometimes you have to innovate based upon your why, based upon your purpose, based upon your charism, based upon your Marinist tradition, based upon your identity-centric focus that each and every individual matters, based upon your purported suggestion that we are all servant leaders. giving up some of our privilege for others. Innovators step up and they step out, whether they are leaders in roles of leadership or there are individuals who choose to lead. Now, I went out and I wrote lots of books around this. And yes, this is a shameless plug. The books are right there out in the hallway. And anyone who would like to purchase one of those books and learn more about that, they are right out there. And please feel free to stop freely and to get one. As we wrote those books, though, we talked about this idea of how do we frame this issue of diversity in the 21st century. And I talked about it very broadly in terms of the definition of diversity. But we also talked about it in terms of the perfect storm moments that we find ourselves that are elevating issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion in ways that are uncommon and incredibly unique in the 21st century moment that we find ourselves. Today's diversity discussion is not simply the social justice effort of our parents, of some of you in the room who are part of that on the front lines. Today's diversity, equity, and inclusion work is about the world we live in today. And no missives, no voices out of Washington, no individuals who are in roles of leadership and have a mantle and a responsibility to lead at a higher gear can change that. The world we live in today has shifted now and forevermore by a number of factors. One is technology and social media has forever shifted the landscape. Today's world, we must be engaged because things move so fast. If you're in a role of leadership, change has never happened faster. Diversity crisis moments have never become elevated quicker. Issues of connectivity and engagement have never mattered more than they do today. Another disrupting factor that is elevating issues of diversity is the rise of the centennial generation. I'm going to go into a little bit more clarity around that. The students who are coming next are the most diverse generation in the history of our nation. They're the most diverse in terms of race. They're the most diverse in terms of ethnicity. They're the most diverse in terms of their sexuality and how they choose to love and lead. At the Boys and Girls Clubs of America, we engaged in research. And what we saw was 30+% of our students are open to and engaged in living fluid sexualities. That reality is here, and it is coming, and it is next. It is irrefutable and unescapable. And so this generation is more diverse than ever before in terms of religion. They're more diverse than ever before because this is a generation that's been engaged in the era of Kardashian. This is a generation that's been engaged in the era of pop culture, in the era of reality television. This is an era where white girls named Susie were in their room with girls who all looked like them saying the N-word and doing the songs. And it is normatized. And so when they show up on our campuses, that is normal for some. And in some ways, how could you expect anyone to be different? And at the same time, you have students who are coming out of other cultural contexts who are emerging and coming to campus and they're saying, no, 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 no. And so you have culture conflicts that come that are engaged in this centennial generation. Another piece of this centennial generation is we have the shifting that happened with the Great Recession. And the city of Dayton was at ground zero of that Great Recession, when the titans of industry, which defined what it meant to labor and to work and to access the middle class and the good life, went away. When plants shuttered for good, when NCR closed, when General Motors closed, when Delphi closed, when these various different places that were venerable components of the very foundation and the bedrock of what it meant to be a Daytonian went away in that Great Recession. And what did that do? That signaled the powerful emergence of a global knowledge economy right here in the city of Dayton. And it elevated the need for us to do what? Not simply educate those who are at the top of the pyramid of privilege, but the need for us to provide post-secondary education and skill and workforce development for every single level of that pyramid of opportunity. For individuals growing up with and without privilege, for individuals growing up in West Dayton or in rural Kentucky, it mattered not the need for us to provide those opportunities. I saw that hit ground zero with my family. All of my brothers and my sister-in-laws and my cousins were engineers. And overnight, those opportunities were gone. And they were the ones who had educated themselves and did everything right. Let alone those who were already vulnerable and those who were already in interlocking positions of intergenerational poverty. which is stricken in our communities and holds folks so very tight. And this last force that is elevating this conversation as never before, the emergence of President Trump in the White House in this moment of leadership. Threats to dismantle Title IX, missives around DACA, LGBTQ dynamics in the military, missive to attack race-conscious policy in undergraduate admissions. I'm not stumping. I'm not on the left or the right. I am commenting to the world we live in today, which is bringing these issues from the background to the foreground, and that each and every one of us have to be locked into it. Because if we dismantle the agencies and we dismantle the policies and we dismantle the initiatives that are created to provide for the sanctity of our freedoms, the things that make us American, the things that make this an environment that's not just to be great for some, but an environment that should be great for all, the fundamental dynamics of inclusive excellence, then where are we? What do we have left? Where will we go from here? You know, this generation, and I talk about them a lot, Generation We, Generation Z, the Millennials Part D, the Homeland generation, the app generation, and oh, my personal favorite, the selfie generation. You know it. We got some selfie generation folks over there. I see you over there, selfie generation. They're over there like, that ain't me. I know how you roll over there. I see y'all right there. Y'all selfie generation all day long. They're what I refer to as the centennials, right? The centennial generation that's coming next. And as leaders in college and university environments, we find ourselves in an incredibly unique context in terms of generational diversity. Not just in terms of LGBTQ and transgender, we find ourselves in a different environment in terms of generational diversity. Because colleges and universities are unique because they're the only space where we are engaging with the boomers, we are engaging Generation X, we are engaging the millennials, and we are also engaging the centennials. Each and every one of those generations find reality in our environments. Boomers who are digital neophytes, Generation Xers who are digital immigrants, millennials who are digital natives, and hear me when I say this, centennials, that next level, who are digitally intuitive. Say it with me now, digitally intuitive. They are the most sophisticated users and consumer of digital content in the history of this nation. Now, my daughter is now 3 years old. Her name is Warner L. Williams. That's my mother. Affectionately known as Warner Bear, right? Warner Bear. Now, Warner Bear is the light of my universe, right? As I'm sure your child is yours. Now, I was a new father, a first-time father, and I was in my study, and my daughter had to be maybe a year and a half. And she was sitting on my lap, and she was just crying. Wah, wah, wah. Now, as a father, I have some moves in my toolkit, just as I recommend for each of you as leaders to have these different tools in your toolkit. And so I went to my first tool. Keisha, Warner's crying, what do I do? That's the first tool in the toolkit. You pull out the SOS signal, you call your wife. The second tool in the toolkit, right? The second tool in the toolkit, I said, maybe it's time for a feed. Wasn't time for a feed. Third tool in the toolkit that I pursued with challenge was I had to check that diaper. You know, was the diaper messed? Was it one or was it two? Wasn't time for a change. Oh my God, wah, 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 wah. Fourth move in my toolkit, right? Because I believe great leaders, great athletes, they got multiple moves in their toolkit. You know, don't be a basketball player that can only go right. You want to go left. You want a mid-range. You want a three-pointer. You want to be able to have a back-to-the-basket game, right? You need multiple moves in your toolkit. So I went to a move, right, because I'm an innovator. I tried to search and reapply something that worked for somebody else. So I went to some moves that worked for my father-in-law and my wife because they had this nervous twitch. So I put the child on my knee, and I start bouncing her like this. And then she kept crying. Wah, 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 wah. 4 moves, no love for Damon. No love. She's just crying. And then something magical happened that helped me to understand who she was as a centennial. She went like this, and then went like this. And she swiped for the first time at nearly a year and a half years old. And she went from wah, 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 wah to. Because ordinary people start playing through the daggone iPad, because you know if you hit it with multiple fingers, something crazy gonna happen. We're just ordinary people. It was just playing, the music was playing, and now she wasn't wah, 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 wah. She was smiling because she was digitally intuitive. She will never have to be told how to turn on a computer. She will never have to be taught how to swipe. She will never have to be told how to access in a self-directed way information. She will never have to be told how to be engaged in that world and that environment, because intuitively it is who she is at her DNA. What the internet does for us is a couple things. Number one, it means we live in a world where students don't ever have to be alone. They can always be connected. Two, it means that they always have voice in the world. Three, it means that they are constantly building their personal brands in the world we live in today. And yet we bring them to our campuses and we educate them as if it was 1980. We bring them to our campuses and we don't meet them and engage them and challenge them where they are. When they wake up every day, and if the first thing is they're trying to figure out what do, they pull out that tool and they start self-directed trying to solution build to get to the answer. And so in what ways do we dynamically innovate and pivot our learning environments to meet the need of that diverse generation? Now, when we come to our institutions and we define diversity, I believe we have to have a framework. The framework that I rely upon that powers this idea of inclusive excellence is the model that is behind me, that is expressed in my book, Strategic Diversity Leadership. And I talk about at the top of the pyramid of our work, diversity work is about getting folks in and getting them out. It's about access and it's about equity. Equity of outcomes. And I want to reintroduce that word of equity. When we're looking at underrepresentation of diverse groups, we're talking about a conversation of equity, not diversity. And that's okay. When we talk about this idea of a multicultural and inclusive campus experience, we're asking the question, how are we not all just here, but how are we creating an environment that folks feel included, and even more fundamentally, they feel a sense of belonging. They feel a sense of engagement. They don't feel a sense of outsiderness. And that happens in myriad ways. It happens by creating culturally relevant vehicles, like what just happened over the weekend, which was the alumni event for African Americans that had a strong focus there. It comes in creating offices like you did a couple years ago around LGBTQ students. It comes in the training that we're doing to educate our faculty and our staff and our community to know how not to exclude, but to include in your day-to-day lived realities of doing the work. It's all of those things that come together. But in the 21st century, this work of diversity is not just about inclusion, not just about access, not just about equity. It's also fundamentally about leadership development. Now, I was at the University of Chicago Booth School of Management a couple years ago at a leadership event where one of my dear friends, who's the managing general partner for Black Entertainment Television, Michael D. Armstrong, was being honored with the Young Alumni Award. So we're at this event. My wife and I were sitting at the table, and Mike is getting ready to go up to get the award, and we're at the table and everybody's exchanging pleasantries. At the time, I was still at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Individual at my table, he was very nattily dressed. He had one of those suits that was super tight, the glasses were super cool, and he had the cool cut, and he was cool, cool, cool upon cool. And he looked like he had a lot of money. So we're sitting there at the table and we're talking. And in sitting at the table and talking with him, I said, what do you do? He said, oh, I do M&A for one of the mergers and acquisitions for one of the major management consulting firms. And then he said to me, well, what do you do now? When you're the chief diversity officer, you talking to somebody that don't look like you, and they ask you what you do and you do diversity work, you don't know what you're going to get when you answer. So he said, what do you do? And I said, oh, gosh, okay. I said, well, I do diversity work at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I'm the chief diversity officer, so on and so on, so on, and we work on this and work on that. And then he said my favorite thing. Students in the room, please take note of this. This is the best thing in the world you can ever say. Yes, you right there with the lovely pink on. It's the best thing you could ever say. If somebody asks you a question, if somebody puts something out there and you don't know quite what to say, check this out now. Make sure y'all get this. All you got to do is lean in and say, could you say more? That's all you got to do. You asked if they could say more, right? Because most people only got one move. Right? So you ask if they can say more. I'm telling you, it works. It works. You're in a difficult dialogue or anything with your man or whatever. Just tell them, could you say more? You know, I need to know, right? You lean into it, right? So you need to know that, right? So you say, so I said to the brother, I said, well, could you say more? He said, well, yeah, I'm so excited about the work that you're doing. He said, because in my world, issues of culture are the difference between success and lack of success when we bring two companies together. And we need leaders who can lead and innovate across boundaries and lines in that environment. We need individuals who bring 21st century skills to the table. We need individuals who can ideate and problem solve. We need individuals who are digitally literate. We need individuals who are communication savvy, not just in a tweet of 100 and some odd characters, but can really write, who can really speak in coherent sentences, who can look you in the eye. Yes, I'm talking to you, Centennials. Don't play me now. Dr. Williams came here for you, who can look someone in the eye and have a real conversation. They need individuals who can lead and follow in teams. You know, millennials think they just need to be leading everything after a day at the job. I don't know what Centennials are going to be talking about, but it's probably going to be even worse. They need you to be able to lead and follow in teams. But even beyond that, they need for you to have cultural competencies. The ability to look at the world from multiple perspectives. The ability to have empathy for others. The ability to connect and to engage when you're in environments where perhaps the individuals don't look like you. That's the reason why we need University of Dayton to be diverse, so it can become this living and learning laboratory. Not that diverse individuals who come here are lab rats for our amusement, but that this is an environment for engagement. This is an environment for sharing. This is an environment when you come from certain neighborhoods and backgrounds and communities and you've never seen anybody that look different from you, you can have authentic and real conversations inside and outside of the classroom, on the campus and engaged in the community. That's why we talk about high impact learning experiences. That's why we engage in that work, because it's so important. You know, I collect data all the time on teams, and you know, I always like to throw this up. You want to know what your students is doing. The majority of them, they spend 9 hours a day on some form of digital engagement. Top most preferred platform, Snapchat. Second most, Instagram. Third most, and rising greatly, YouTube. Administrators, leaders, faculty members, what is your content strategy to work with your students in terms of how they engage information? I'm just saying. So many of our institutions act like the cheetah and not the wolf. The cheetah and not the wolf. The cheetah will sit high on the plain of the Serengeti, waiting for the antelope to run. And then the cheetah will go bursting out of them with incredible velocity, reaching their top speed of 90+ miles per hour, capable of maintaining that speed for all of about 600 meters. And then when they're done, they go back to the plain of the Serengeti and they sit and they do this. I spend a lot of time watching Nature Channel, don't trip. They go, right? By comparison, the wolf moves collectively, not hunting individually or in pairs, but as a group. Every individual in the pack playing a role. There may be an alpha that's leading the way, but every individual plays the role. Game of Thrones fans in the house, you know what I'm about to say now. And when winter comes, the lone wolf will die, but the pack will survive. Y'all know what I'm talking about. And so the question is, are your diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts more cheetah-like or wolf-like? And in my assessment of my time here over the last couple of days, I'm seeing some incredible emerging pack-like behavior. Give it up for your leadership that's bringing pack-like behavior to the table. And so when you're moving in pack-like ways, you're being more strategic, you're being more connected, you're being more collaborative. You don't just create a chief diversity officer, but you're asking the question how these things come together. I am going to stop there. I am going to provide a redacted PDF of the rest of my presentation because I would not come without entertaining some questions, and I want to make sure I keep us on schedule. Thank you so much. This concludes the formal part of my presentation. So we do have microphones 1, 2, and 3. We are recording the session, so if you could please take a microphone. Any questions that you'd like to ask? I don't need comments, just questions. I will cut you off. Questions, questions, questions. It's all about the burning questions. Questions. Look at the centennials looking away like, ooh, he about to ask us to ask a question. You know, I do believe in Socratic method. Don't play. Here I come. Questions from anybody. You have a question? All right, you got to go to the microphone. That's my niece. Give her some love. That's my niece. Go on, Samaria. Another potential flyer. All right. You know, we're going to introduce everybody right here. What's your question?
What are your books about?
Good question. Give her some love for that question. Right. So tell me more. That's right. My books are about issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. When I wrote my books, I wanted to produce something that would be classic and timeless. I tell folks all the time, when I went to my laboratory to write those books, I didn't go to the laboratory to write two books. I went to the laboratory to write one book. And I turned that book in, and my publisher, who was lovely, he said, Damon, he has a British accent. He said, Damon, these are lovely and this is very lovely and very substantive, but what you've produced is a book and a half. He said, we can't price this book sufficiently for anyone to ever buy one. So I had a couple options. One option was to go back and break the book down the middle and call it Volume 1, Volume 2. The other option was to cut very aggressively on the cutting room floor and let a lot of content go. The third strategy, which is what I chose to do, is I went back, I reframed the books, and I decided to publish not one book, but two books at the same time, and it took me another 18 months to do it. I love and I embrace the grind. And what I wanted to produce was the Black Album and Reasonable Doubt. What I wanted to produce was the low-end theory and beats, rhymes, and life. What I wanted to produce was sounds in the key of life. What I wanted to produce was Thriller and Off the Wall. And in my arena, that's what those books are, Nisi. And so we've sold thousands and thousands of books, and I'm going to visit 30 institutions across the country, and I just came out of the silent phase in building the campaign. Other questions, anywhere? Monty, you ain't gonna let your little cousin trump you are now. You got a question too? All right, don't play. I'm gonna come over there and get you. Yes, ma'am.
Good evening. You mentioned several things that are going on here, programs, processes that you've seen here at the University of Dayton. You also talked about places that are doing it right. What colleges and universities have you been associated with that you feel are really taking this challenge and being very aggressive like the Wolfpack to do it correctly?
Great question. So one of the things I always say is that no institution is doing it right on all the issues. There's different institutions, I think, that are making success in some arena and not others. So for example, my alma mater, the University of Michigan, I think they do phenomenal work around intergroup dialogue and creating a context where students are engaged in the work of dialogue to prepare them for 21st century skills. I think they do a great job in that regard. But they're not doing equally well on diversity of student enrollments. The graduation rates are strong, but not what they could be. You know, so I think there's some strength there. Another institution I was personally a part of was the University of Connecticut. You want to see an institution that moved the needle on success of underrepresented students in STEM, go see University of Connecticut. I created the framework with my colleagues for STEM student success there in the early parts of the 2000s. Since we created those frameworks and those initiatives, the number of students completing STEM degrees has increased multiple hundreds of percent. Since that time that we made those intrusive efforts. So I think that's another great place where there's some great things going. Rochester Institute of Technology was an innovator in the faculty diversity space and had done some amazing things in terms of moving very aggressively their faculty diversity outcomes. However, since their very aggressive beginning, their effort has slowed because they weren't committed to change over the long haul, and they had shifts in their institutional DNA as they got new presidents, as they got new priorities. And so the commitment waffles, and so then the success slows down. So those are three examples.
Okay, thank you very much. And let's see, no one is there, so may I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
What is the role of the historically Black college in this whole area of diversity and inclusion? Yeah,
great question. So historically Black colleges, as we all know, have been really the foundation of access for the African American community dating back, to time immemorial, and historically have played a critically important role. In the 21st century, what we know, though, is that the majority of them are hurting hard.
Yes.
Not because they're not important and necessary, but because the ecosystem of the institutions they compete with have changed and evolved. Why am I going to Morehouse College when I could go to Georgia State? Why am I going to Central State when I could potentially go to Wright State? Why am I going to Kentucky State when I could go to University of Louisville? Now, my little brother right there, he's the director of admissions at Central State, and he has actually got them with the largest enrollment class in how many years, Stephen? In the last 4 years. Give him some love for that. Innovative, right? So to answer your question, I think a couple things are going to happen when we look to the future. Number one, I think that the HBCU context, the marketplace, is going to constrict. I think that as we look to the future, some are going to have to go away. Number two, I think we're going to have to be looking at some creative partnerships. So what are the partnership models between HBCUs and community colleges, HBCUs and other post-secondary providers like the Apollo Group, you know, University of Phoenix? They are looking at buying HBCUs, straight up writing a check and buying them, right? And so I believe that as we think about the marketplace, there's going to be some constriction. There's going to be new market solutions that are going to emerge. And ultimately, I think they will always have a place. But I do think there's going to be some shifts and changes in the system. But great question.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Yes.
As you know, we go way, way back.
We go way
back. This is not only my fraternity brother, my line brother. His family's like my family.
Yes, sir.
And we're both involved in the business of education. We both
Yep.
come from that. And I know we had to cut you a little short so you can have some questions. And the main one that I'm always keen on and that I always ask, and I'm always trying to get answers to because I'm a results-driven person also. Why is there so much talk, yet you and I both went to Miami, in Oxford, Ohio, and the numbers for African-American students, it was only 5% when we were there.
Yeah.
It's more, it's less now.
Yeah.
So why do we talk so much, especially at Sinclair where I am now, where we have more students, but the faculty doesn't represent the students?
Yeah.
And then why is it that when I'm teaching at Central State, I got the HBCUs there who just say, it's business as usual.
Right.
So we see it's almost like on 3 different levels with 3 different entities. They make that talk and they talk that talk, but why are the results not changing?
Yeah, great question. Great question. So one part of the answer is I think that each of those institutions, you know, I could go deep into each of them, but each of them is nested in a strategic kind of environment, and there's different challenges they're trying to overcome to diversify themselves. And so I think that a part of it is strategy. A part of it is strategy, right? Is there a good strategy in place for Miami University to further diversify, as an example? Miami University has resources, they have great brand, they have great reach, they are selective but not so selective that students can't get into them. I think that's a question of strategy and resource allocation. In terms of Sinclair and this conversation around the students are very diverse, but maybe the faculty are not, some leaders just don't know and just don't care. And at the end of the day, one of the things that we see in community college contexts across the country is their student bodies look one way, but their faculty do not, because there is no strategic commitment to diversifying the faculty. It does not matter. The third example you gave around Central State, you know, sometimes when you see low and poor performance, sometimes folks don't know how to innovate themselves out of where they are. I have had an opportunity to compete for multiple HBCU presidencies that I did not choose to pursue because honestly, I didn't feel like they were contexts where I could innovate them out of their current circumstance because I was starting at a place where I didn't have enough of the who on the bus of leadership to do it, right? Yes. Jim Collins talks about first who, then what. If you don't have great folk on the bus with you, you can't get great outcomes done. I don't care who you are. Right. No messiahs here, no individuals who have all the answers here. And so those are just some answers to your wonderful and in-depth question. Attorney Mitchell. Yes, ma'am.
Good evening. Thank you so much, first of all, for your lecture this evening. I have kind of like a 2-part question.
Yes.
The first is, so I work in housing and residence life on the student development, student affairs side of the house. And so as we are all trying to work towards, you know, our initiative of the University for the Common Good and to be more diverse and inclusive, what are your suggestions on how the academic side of the house and the student development side of the house cannot be so siloed, and how we can work together, because it takes all of us to raise this village of flyers? And so what are your strategies on that? Yeah. And then the second part of my question is that we definitely need to make sure that we are serving our students in a way that they feel included, that they feel like they belong, especially in a place like this that talks so much about community. I would argue that there are staff folks that don't feel in community. And so how do you balance serving the students, getting persistence, but also creating an inclusive environment from the students all the way up into the president? And so I know that maybe those are two different directions, but those were that was my two-part question.
So the first question is around, the co-curricular, the student affairs, student development, and the curricular academic engaged experience. One of the things I believe in is I don't believe in those hierarchies, right? And so there's the reality that they exist, but I think that individuals cross boundaries to make great things happen, right? And so one things I would offer is, as an innovator, how do you reach out and try to find like-minded individuals who are willing to cross boundaries and try different things that bring together the curricular and the co-curricular? That's one idea. A second idea that I think about is whenever you have an opportunity to create a new strategic plan, you have an opportunity to build innovative, disrupting, new types of stuff in that plan. And so as the conversation is emerging around what an inclusive excellence agenda looks like, I think that that is a hotbed environment for the construction of the curricular and the co-curricular and bringing those things together. The third thing that I would say is there's probably some of those things that already exist. And so how do you find pockets of excellence that are already there and level up, right? So innovators find what works and scale up. And so it's easier to scale up oftentimes than to start new. So those would be three ideas I would offer. The second question that you asked was this idea of how do you create experiences of engagement for students, staff, faculty, the entirety of the institutional community. One of the things that, the needs of staff are different than the needs of students. I think oftentimes we squeeze the staff conversation out of the diversity and inclusion conversation. Mm-hmm. We prioritize the students always. We talk about the faculty issues even if we don't get anything done. And then on the staff component, we oftentimes don't even engage the conversation in a substantive way. And so my response to that would be, I think staff have a special opportunity to create peer-driven systems of support for one another, I think are really important. I think affinity groups are really important. Coming together and supporting one another, I think is really important. I also think that that community should be a part of the development of whatever new plans and initiatives that come out and develop new tactics and new types of approaches to do things that are good. Yeah. How are we doing on time? Okay. Oh, I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. And why don't you tell everybody your name and what grade you're in and what school you attend?
Okay, my name is Samaria Williams. I am in 5th grade and I am 10 years old and I attend Weller Elementary School.
Okay, what's your question?
My question is, if you could go back to college and think, what would you do better and what would you improve on?
Oh my God, give it up for that question right there. Great question. And one of the things I would say is if I could go back to undergrad, I would do nothing different. Not one thing would I do different. I tell folks all the time, no one ever learned more and did more and had more fun than I did as an undergrad. I spent a lot of time visiting the University of Dayton socially. So I had a lot of fun, but I got a lot of great things done. At the graduate school level, if there's one thing I would do differently, is I would have more quickly came to my passion for organizational behavior and strategic change, and I would have doubled in with the MBA and the PhD at Michigan. I realized that the MBA would be a great credential to have. Too late for me to really do it in my PhD program. So if I had to do one thing different, that would be the only thing I'd do different. Everything else I keep exactly the same. Yeah, great question. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
All right, all right. Can I get some living learning credits for all I've done around the world?
Thank you, Mr. Williams. My name is Ernesto Velasquez. I'm faculty in the philosophy department.
Yes, sir.
And there's a lot of different kind of issues that we're thinking about in terms of diversity in our classes, and one of them has to do with, like what are best practices, and what notion of best are we assuming when we're looking around for things to try and draw on. And one of the things that comes up, we were talking a little bit earlier today, is sort of envisioning like futures, different kinds of futures of what would we want, say, University of Dayton to be, or or other kinds of contexts. So, I mean, if you imagine a situation where, say, University of Dayton has demographic diversity at a staff level, a faculty level, a student level, et cetera, I wonder what you think about the importance of curricular diversity, because, I mean, in a situation where you have all of this diversity at all these levels, if the curriculum, the knowledge that's produced is very Eurocentric, right, and it's not opening up for other knowledges from all over the planet, then while on the one hand that would be a positive vision of having all this diversity, but if the structure of knowledge, the way it's produced and disseminated all over the planet is the same, then how do you handle issues of cognitive injustice? Because the university is a formation that came into existence at a certain point in time, developed, has a life, and we don't know what its future may be. Do you have any guidance for that?
Sure, great question. So one of the things, if you think back to the model I had up, which was the pyramid model, at the top of the pyramid was access and equity. At the center of the pyramid was multicultural and inclusive environment. Down to the left, my left, your right, was preparing students for a diverse and global world. And down to my right, your left, was engaging in domestic and international diversity-themed scholarship. I believe that 21st century diversity plans and initiatives should engage in curricular innovation and should be looking at what that means. But I also think it should not just be the curriculum. I think it's around having hard conversations about what does knowledge production look like in a 21st century context. I think it's about having the conversation around how does engaged community scholarship, how is that validated in tenure and promotions decisions and processes? In what ways are we validating the work that is critical and conscious in different types of ways, but maybe not traditional in different types of ways? I think all that has to be on the table of conversation. How do you tell someone who has 800,000 Twitter followers or Instagram followers and Facebook followers, and everything they produce, they put in the world, it changes and ripple affects the world, that their work is not meritorious if it has a scholarly core and how it was developed? But yet they're making choices intentionally about the dissemination of knowledge, which maybe look different than putting it in the most canon and hallowed educational journal that 3 people access in 5 years, right? And so, you know, I think that these are tough conversations around this that are going to have to be elevated, and I think it's all a part of this discourse. Yes, sir.
Hi. My name is Joe Prentice, and just to give you reference to, I have a couple quick questions.
Okay. We're going to rapid speed data.
Yeah, absolutely. Man. Okay, so part of my education started here as a University of Dayton student. My wife is a graduate of UD. Part of my question, first one is, you stated some things that the university that you've seen they're kind of doing, which you thought well in terms of or beginning. So I'd wonder if this maybe just one of those topics you might touch on. Sure. My second question would be in terms of when you talk about the diversity taking place, in terms of your recommendations of where universities, in terms of where they're located. My wife is a native Daytonian, which started her education here and then finished at the Wright State School of Medicine. All 3 of my children have had different experiences at HBCUs, down at Xavier, up in Cleveland. It's a complex question, that's taking place. So in terms of reaching out to locally, and then the other question I have is in terms of financial. You talked about preparation in part of your issue, and one of the things we know today, I as a parent with 3 college graduates, the financial aspect of it is so huge and diverse depending on where your child is going. UD, when I went to school, started back in that 1980 scenario. They actively recruited in the Washington, D.C. area, where I'm originally from, and didn't know what UD was until, like I say, went there to excuse me, my stroke sometimes, where they were part of a program there. I don't know if they still attend, but I know that many of the students I attended with, we didn't know about UD until actually we went to that activity in Washington, where they actively pursued speaking or bringing students on board.
Sure. So that was a lot. You know, I'll start with the last question. around financing post-secondary education and different types of educational experiences and opportunities. And I say this all the time, and one of the things I tell is I don't sugarcoat things. I get down right to the brass tacks of it. Every institution is not for every student. You just can't afford to go there. And the economic payout that comes for going to certain institutions and majoring in communication studies and encumbering $180,000 of loan indebtedness and getting a 3.0 GPA is not worth the ROI. Period, end of story. So one of the things I think that we as parents and educators have to do is help our students to make good choices about where they go and where we spend and allocate our money. That's one thing. A second thing is I'm a big believer in alternative pathways to the baccalaureate degree, right? You may need to start your experience at Sinclair Community College and bridge to the University of Dayton. And I think that it's incumbent for great institutions like UD and great institutions like Sinclair to understand that ecosystem bridge building perspective and build strategies and efficiencies that allow for students to access that bridge. I think that's a second piece of this that becomes very, very important. The third thing about it is I think the institutions like a University of Dayton have to really seriously commit to generating the type of economic resources in capital campaigns that allow for there to be scholarship resources for Pell Grant eligible economically challenged students or students that maybe aren't economically challenged, they just can't afford to be here and pay the full freight. So I think all those things are different parts of what needs to happen. The other questions, brother, to be honest, I keep it 100. I can't even answer them because it's a long day and I've been going 6 o'clock and I can't even remember them all. So I'm gonna give you some love and some dap like that and tell you thank you for that question. And I'm gonna go to this last question here and I think we're gonna button it down.
All right, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, sir.
My name's Austin. I also went to Miami University, so go Red Hawks.
Absolutely, all
I
day.
have 2 questions. My first question is, what led you down this journey of diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, great question, man. So as was noted in my opening, I grew up on the west side of Dayton, Ohio. And I grew up in Laurie Sue. And if you know anything about Laurie Sue and growing up off the Berg, you know that that ain't a place to be trifled with. It was a rough neighborhood. It was what it was. It was an African-American centric neighborhood. I went to public schools, and in all of those institutions I went to, I never was really educated in diverse context. The students I went to school with were African-American. Oftentimes the teachers I had were African-American women, and I grew up in an all African-American neighborhood and context. When I was 15 years old, by the grace of my mother and the grace of my father, they sent me to boarding school. I went to Western Reserve Academy, which is one of the best post-secondary institutions in this nation, the 26th oldest boarding school, which now costs about $50,000+ a year to go to high school. Needless to say, we couldn't afford it, but that woman right there made great sacrifices along with my father to allow me to access that opportunity. Yeah, give it up for that. And in going to that environment, I went into that environment, right? And it's the last question, so I'm gonna give a long story. Give me a little love. So going into that environment, it was interesting because my father who raised me, who's not here, Steve Williams, not my biological father, but married my mother and raised me from the time I was 5, they put me in that school. My father was in the first generation to diversify that school. So here I was, the first, second generation African-American to ever go to this very elite selective boarding school. In arriving at that school, I'll never forget arriving and seeing all the cars pulling up. And it was all these cars I never saw before. I didn't know what a Jag was. I didn't know what a BMW was. I did not know what a Porsche was, but I do know now. I didn't know anything about any of those things, right? But I saw these things and the kids were being unloaded and my roommate was white. And it was the first experience I had with diversity. You know, and I never forget, I'm pulling out my Magic Johnson poster, putting that up. He's pulling out his Larry Bird poster, putting that up. I'm pulling out my Run DMC poster, putting that up. He's pulling out his Steppenwolf poster, putting that up. His Pink Floyd Off the Wall, putting that up. I never forget, he had a little boom box, a little stereo system, and he was playing his little stereo. So every morning we get going to Steppenwolf, get your motor running, get your motor running. And all this was going on. And he was just blasting me out because I had a real little box. But then on Christmas, my parents got me a big old box that was affectionately known as a ghetto blaster. And I came back and I just destroyed him. I destroyed him. I absolutely destroyed him. But inside of that relationship where we didn't like each other, by the end of the second semester, we were fast friends. In my boarding school, there were 8 African Americans of 350 plus, but there were kids who were Muslim, there were kids who were Pakistani, there were kids who were Jewish, and we were friends. You know, we were developing relationships. My roommate, who is a very, very successful surgeon and entrepreneur, Indian, tells me very clearly that if he had not had the relationship with me as an Indian and the other African-American students who took him in, because he also felt like an outsider, he would not have done his residency in urban America working with underserved African-American communities, and he would not be the physician he is today. It was inside of those experiences where I saw my father's exploits lionized on the wall, because he was a great athlete and a great academic. I was kind of, you know, not that good. But he was a beast. And seeing those things and me being an outsider to that environment, but because my father had integrated the environment, I was a legacy. So I was outsider and insider. And in my senior year, I wrote my thesis on Malcolm X and the Black Muslims. And like so many, that introduced me to these questions of power and privilege, access and opportunity, haves and have-nots, racialized dynamics. And every single thing I've done from that beginning is what has taken me now. The final thing I'll say is this. In 2017, I was just acknowledged with the Waring Prize of Leadership for Western Reserve Academy, which is the highest alumni award given by that boarding school founded in 1826, and I'm the first African American ever to win it. I say that for everybody in the room, particularly for my nephew and my niece. It's not where you begin, it's how far you walk, it's how far you grind. It's how far you love and give to others. It's what you put into it each and every day. Thank you all for the blessing of the time today. Thank you so much. Thank you, my sister. Thank you so much.
Wow. Damon, why don't you join us up here, if you would? Is Tiffany in the house, or Sean? Well, Tiffany, okay, Chandra has a camera, so. Native son of Dayton, someone who really cut his teeth on this work right here at the University of Dayton, and our inaugural scholar. So we decided we wanted to present Damon with an expression of our gift beyond the monetary. He came free before, but he didn't come free this time.
But the love is endless.
The love is endless. And to present this gift, I'm gonna ask Tiffany to help me unveil something we want you to take with you, man, and something that will remind you of home.
Yes, sir.
But in presenting the gift, there's a story behind what we're about to show, and let me just unveil it first of all. Oh. And I'm going to ask, with honor, the artist, who is a highly esteemed, internationally known artist in our city, Bean Davis, so please come forward. I call him Baba Bean. Baba means father in the West African language. I'm going to ask him to tell a brief story that you can take with you every time you look at this. There's a story behind this. So I'm going to step out the way. Yes, sir.
Thank you. It's an honor. It's an honor to meet you after knowing your mother. I'm honored to be a part of this. This is a very special occasion, and maybe full circle too, because this particular piece was significant. It's a limited edition signed print called An Ode to Two Black Dayton Poets, Paul Laurence Dunbar, We Wear the Mask, and a young living poet by the name of David L. Matthews, and his poem called Time Brings About a Change, that he changed through knowledge and wisdom and self-awareness. And it also had another point. What it also spoke to was that we had at the Dayton Convention Center a major festival. And at that festival were artists, musicians, and dancers in our vendor's booth. And next to my booth was Fashion Fair. And as a busload of young African Americans came, they all lined up for the free gifts of rouge and makeup and stuff that can curl your hair or straighten your hair. And it was also a message to them, because these two high fashion photographs of brother in jerry curl and sister in various kinds of high fashion. I was telling the young people, take the free gifts, but know that you're already beautiful. Know that you're already beautiful. And I am glad to be able to hear you all morning, my wife and I thought so much of you that this is my wedding anniversary gift to my wife, to come and hear you.
Thank you, my brother.
Thank you, man.
Thank you so much. God bless you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
So with love and just an expression of our appreciation for the work that you do on behalf of so many, thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you, brother.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for joining us this evening. We were able to get a really like a 40% discount on this book. There's a reason why it's probably the most widely read manuscript on diversity, strategic diversity leadership, really in the country right now, and it has been for some time. So this is an opportunity to get the book and have the author sign it. So thank you, and God bless you. Thank you for coming out this evening.